You're listening to Crossword, where cultural clues lead to the truth of the word, and my name is Michelle McAloon. This podcast is actually a companion podcast with my earlier podcast, and that one is called Shots Heard Around the World. And this is really about the Battle of Lexington. And today I am interviewing Mr. Steve Delity, who plays a character, not even a character, a historical person in the reenactment of the Battle of Lexington, which is happening on Patriots Day, April 19th, this Saturday. I hope everyone gets a chance to watch, and I hope everyone gets to learn a little bit about the Battle of Lexington. It was really important to the starting and the founding of our country, which is very, very important to remember these days. All right. Thank you. God bless. Thanks for listening. Hello, folks. One of the treats of having a nonfiction book podcast is the people that you get to interview, who write the stories, who tell the stories, who live the stories. But today we have a special treat because we have a reenactor, a actual live living Minuteman of the 21st century, who is going to participate in the Battle of Lexington on Saturday, April 19th, the 250th celebration of the Battle of Lexington. I'd like to make a warm welcome to Steve Delity, a.k.a. Daniel Harrington. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to participate.
Oh, that's great. All right, Steve Delity. You hail to us from Lexington, Massachusetts. That's where you live right now, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I know you started off life as a West Point cadet and then became a very successful businessman. But now you find yourself dressing as and becoming, not just dressing, but becoming one of the Lexington Minutemen. Tell us about who you will transform yourself into on Saturday on the 250th celebration of the Battle of Lexington.
Okay. I portrayed Daniel Harrington. Daniel Harrington was the clerk of Captain John Parker's Lexington Militia Company. And one of the strongest attractions for me to join the Minuteman Company is that every member portrays a character that was on the green that morning. So when I joined, there was a list of half a dozen or so available slots. And I looked up all the individuals, and Daniel Harrington was the one I found most interesting. And I'm glad I chose him. He's pretty prominent, reasonably prominent character in the grand scheme of things in the town of Lexington. And there's a lot more to learn. And I've begun to read a lot of books that I otherwise wouldn't have to try to pick out some nuggets about his life.
Well, Daniel Harrington, a.k.a. Steve Delity, tell us about your life, Daniel Harrington's life, and where he was in his life at the morning of the battle.
On that morning, he was 36-year-old. He and his wife, Anna Monroe Harrington, lived right on the green. They just on the very west side of the Lexington Green, the village green, the green where the confrontation ultimately took place. He was a blacksmith. He was, for the town, reasonably well off. He was a respected member of the town. He was selected to be a member of the Committee of Correspondence and Safety prior to the eruption of the conflict. And then he was elected a town selectman and town assessor and served in various other roles. He and his wife, at the point of April 1775, had 7 children. The oldest was a 14-year-old boy. The youngest was a 15-month-old girl. And at that point, I think 3 boys and 4 daughters who witnessed. Well, the oldest for sure witnessed because we have affidavit that he wrote in 1825 about his experience witnessing the events of that morning from his front window of the house overlooking the green.
So this is a man that he is really in the very tapestry of this town. He has grown up here. He has had his family here. His wife, Alice Monroe, is also very much part of this town, and I believe she has a couple relatives also in the battle on this morning.
Oh, she does. So ultimately, Daniel saw three relatives: Anna's father, his father-in-law, Robert Monroe, and his cousin Jonathan Harrington Jr. and another cousin, Caleb Harrington, all die from wounds suffered at the hands of the British that morning.
Let's position him where he was that morning. So on the 17th, or on the 16th, 17th, and 18th of 1775, April. Solomon Brown.
He was one of the scouts sent out. Yes, he's one who came in with word that the British were on their way.
Did Daniel Harrington do you think, ever saw the regulars or the British prior to the actual battle?
It's unknown, not documented, but likely, just given where he lives. So tensions were high, things were stirring, and British sent patrols out ahead of the advancing columns of British that were marching. They were dispatched, the British troops, late at night. They rode across the Charles River, got out in marshy, boggy land on the shore. So it was miserable for these British guys. They were like water-soaked boots. They're marching, but there were advance guards. And then, of course, Paul Revere and moments later, William Dawes both arrived in town late. There was a whole network of alarm riders. So along the way, they were letting these alarm riders know that the regulars were on the move, and they went out on their network. Several dozen towns got the word, and the word was that they were going to Concord through Lexington. They knew that they were after weapons, gunpowder, stores held in Concord. Concord at that point had been the provisional capital of the colonial government. But John Hancock and Sam Adams, two prominent figures in the Sons of Liberty, leading this whole, Sons of Liberty were behind the Boston Tea Party and the resistance. They had fled Boston, fearing that they were going to be imprisoned, and were staying at a relative's house in Lexington, Reverend Jonas Clark. So they were there. So Revere and Dawes were coming to Lexington first through different routes to first warn John Hancock and Adams to evacuate, to get out, so that they couldn't be arrested. So there was a lot of activity. And beginning then, riders went to Captain Jonas Park, and he came down to the Village Green. So by 1 a.m., British riders would have gone by his house, who were the advance patrol. Some of this other activity, once Revere and Dawes were in town, and he being so close to the Village Green, and the Village Green being the central location for gathering of the townspeople and where the militia drilled, he probably saw a lot of things. But by 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., the first muster was held out on the Village Green. Don't know who was there, but there was 30 to 40 people. He probably was one of them, but we don't have documentation of exactly who was in that muster. And Captain John Parker informed the militiamen who had assembled, well, we've sent scouts out. If you live close by, you can return home. Otherwise, you can rest in Buckman's Tavern, which is still standing. And you can rest there, but be within earshot of the drummer's call. So he probably went home, being so close. But it's plausible he could have gone to Buckman Tavern, being the clerk. There might have been business to take care of. I don't really know. What I do know is that he's documented as one of the men that were on. There were several depositions, and I'm just getting my hands around all the different ones, but there was one that was written and signed by 33 members, and he was one of them. So he was definitely on the green when they confronted the British.
Well, okay, so you brought a couple things there. He was the clerk. So he was the clerk of the militia, right? So he was basically we'd say the S1 or he was the admin guy for
Yep.
the militia at this point. Okay. He has this fabulous front row seat, literally, to what is happening on the green. That house, from what I understand, the Harrington house is no longer there. At least Daniel's house is no longer
Correct.
there. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. The one next to it, though, is still there, right? Or
Correct. There were two Harrington houses in 1775 that faced the green. Daniel and Jonathan, who died that morning, and the lot to the right of Daniel Harrington's house. Later, in 1794, Daniel built a house there that still stands. He built that house for his oldest son, Levi, who I mentioned earlier was 14. And Levi lived there, and that house still stands. And on the reenactment, the morning, I will start from and retreat to Levi Harrington's property.
Okay, very good. All right. So the battle ensues, right? And actually Alexander Kane, the interview that I have posted before this one, Alexander, he brings up the fact that really the initial skirmish really lasted only like 3 to 5 minutes.
Very short.
That it was very short. Now, did Daniel ever mention anything about who fired the first shot? Because that is the big mystery of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'll just back up. Parker is a remarkable man.
This is Captain Parker, the
Captain
head of...
Parker is
Okay.
pretty remarkable for the composure he had. So he had formed the men and basically said, do not molest them, do not fire on them. Again, I'm paraphrasing. But essentially, if they mean to start war, let it begin here. And then the British, two different British officers, screamed at the militia to disperse and ordered his men to fix bayonet. There's 3 companies of British that were on the green at this point who had fixed bayonets. So I think the scene was very chaotic. What Daniel Harrington's, he and 32 of his fellow members signed was that after the last warning from the British, Parker had said, all right, men, disperse. And just as they were beginning to do that, and just in his deposition, just as the men turned, a shot rang out. And what he says is that it was not the Lexington Minutemen. It wasn't that close. A shot rang out. It was not the Lexington Minutemen. But when that happened, that's when all hell broke loose. And the British were 3 companies, so approximately 300 of the 800 were facing the approximately 70-something, 77. It probably wasn't 77 on the green. Some of the men got to the green late, and there's documentation that some fired like from what you call the sidelines, from the roads as things started to fire. But Daniel was on the green. What it says is he knows not where the fire came from, but when it happened, it was violent and Lexington people began to fall.
Okay, what happened to Anne Monroe during this? And one of the things that Alexander Kane also brought up was that there's a lot of history now about the civilian evacuation that had not occurred before. So what happened to his wife and his children? Where did they go during this melee?
I am not sure. The only thing I have to go on right now is this deposition that Levi, who was 14 at the time, wrote when he was 39. So on the 50th anniversary of the event, those that were witness, there was a movement to get as much recorded as possible by witnesses, and he was one of them. And from that deposition, all I know is that the family was in the house watching. But given that he was watching, probably they were all there, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, fair enough. What about when the British were coming back from Concord back through Lexington? What was Daniel Harrington's involvement then?
So the event that's now been labeled Parker's Revenge. So I think in very courageous leadership by Captain John Parker after the brief skirmish, but after the melee, after 8 Lexington Militia members were slain, another 10 were wounded. And so this is all like 6:15, 6 a.m. type of time frame. By 10:30, they sounded the alarm and the British had moved on. By 10:30, Parker had the alarm sounded again and mustered all of militia. And he gave another famous speech. And again, I'll paraphrase, but basically he said, we took an oath to defend all that's precious to us, our town, our families, our life, if necessary. And now blood has been spilled. Again, I'm paraphrasing. And he essentially said, we know they have to come back through here at some point. And I want to go out and fight them on their retreat. And he said something to the effect of, I will not demand anyone to go, but I'm asking you all to go. And the story, as I understand it, is every man that mustered went out. Again, there's no documentation of specifically who went out on Parker's Revenge. We know a few names. 2 more Lexington militia members died, but they went on the road between Lexington and Concord. And there's a town called Lincoln, a piece of which intersects this road from Lexington to Concord. And they went out and found ground right around the Lexington-Lincoln line. And I think now we have evidence that Parker said he wanted to stay on Lexington ground when he confronted them. But again, what's known as Parker's Revenge, there's a lot more known since 2014. An archaeological survey was done, and they changed the location of where it had been believed to have taken place.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, based on the fan of musket balls that they were able to recover. And it turns out that Parker put the men in a very good ambush position, and that this was not only a very good ambush position for cover and concealment, it had a very good covered retreat route. And so they retreated, and then they harassed them further along the way, but it's not exactly clear how many interactions there were with the British. It's not clear how many of the British that they killed, but they probably killed more than they lost overall on that day, but there's not an exact number.
Let me ask you a question. How did you decide to become a reenactor? What was the process to become Daniel Harrington? Because I know the costumes are very elaborate. This isn't a casual thing. What led you to this point?
I moved here in 2007, and I'm a history buff, probably have been more of a history buff reading on the Civil War, but I certainly read about the Founding Fathers and had a better than average understanding of the Revolutionary War. But I saw this reenactment the first morning. You have to get up early. They do it. You really have to get there like 4 a.m. to get a good spot.
Yeah.
And things really kick off around 5:15 a.m. I just was so impressed and so moved. I watched this reenactment and I saw the British, and you don't get 800 reenactors on the British side, but the number of British reenactors outnumber the colonial reenactors, the Lexington Minutemen. But just to see this and to see like how much courage it took for them to stand there. And then, of course, the firing starts and all of the musketry with the black powder that's used. There was just this enormous cloud of musket smoke, and this black fog just descended onto the Lexington Green. And I just thought this was very symbolic. This black fog was descending on the British Empire hold in North America. So I was interested, but kids were small. I was traveling like crazy. In 2014, my neighbor joined. And so I knew what I was getting into, what's required. And the standards are high. They take this very seriously. Living history, very authentic clothing, authentic equipment. And as documents are uncovered and as Alexander Kane uncovers more and more information, not just he, but things change. So I understand before I joined, people had different canteens than what we have now, but I have a wooden canteen and that's what they had. They didn't have some of the other types of canteens that were available at that point in colonial America, but they now have documentation of sort of what was issued. There was a proclamation made by the provisional governor that towns needed to raise militia and ordered what they needed to be outfitted with. So everything from our cartridge belts, bayonets, whatever muskets they had to be taken to a blacksmith or some type of mechanic to be cut and retrofitted to accept a bayonet. And so a little network developed of creating equipment between the tanners and the shoemakers. They made these things. So 2014 is my friend Rob Roll, who portrays a Monroe, who portrays a cousin of my Daniel Harrington's wife. There's the Harringtons, I believe there were a total of 8 on the field that morning.
Okay.
It's a very prominent family. And Monroes were not that many, but 1 or 2 less. And so a lot of Harringtons, a lot of Monroes, some Parkers. But I had dinner, my wife and I and Rob and his wife and I, we got together for dinner about a year ago. And I started asking about the reenacting and how big was the 250th anniversary going to be. And he's like, hey, you got time, but if you're going to do it, now's the time. So I did it. I joined and I'm one of the newest members. This will be my first reenactment. There are 3 others that this will be their first reenactment. It's a lot of work. This will be the busiest year. However long I stick with reenacting, this will be the busiest year because of all the things we're doing on April 19th, starting with Paul Revere's arrival. There's a reenactment of that. I'll take part in that Friday night. This is going to be like a mini FTX from my Army days. There'll be Paul Revere's ride, which will end after midnight. And then the first pickets go out on the green by 3 a.m. So I'll be part of that. And then the reenactment ends. And then we go out to what is now Minuteman National Park to do the Parker's Revenge. And then we kind of just blend in as other militia firing on the British as they retreat. There's a huge reenactment. The largest living reenactment ever, I guess, will take place this Saturday at Minuteman National Park.
That is cool. And folks, I think a lot of this is going to be televised. I have kind of a schedule. I'll put it in the show notes. And I really encourage you, if you get the chance to watch it with your kids. I think at this point in our history, of our modern day history, we need to understand our history and understand how important our story is to our story today. Well, Mr. Harrington, aka Mr. Delity, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule, out of your busy pre-reenactment schedule. So I hope you get a really good, restful night tonight to be ready to go for this weekend. And I wish you the best of luck. Thank you for your service to West Point, but thank you for doing this. This is a service to all of us, and we really appreciate it.
It's my honor to portray one of the men that was out there. That's one of the things I'll say. The fellow Minutemen, they all are drawn to this point of portraying someone that was out there, learning about them, and trying to honor their memory by participating as a reenactor in the events of that day.
That's great. All right. Well, Mr. Delity, thank you very much.
Thank you.